Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday, the 5th of December 2022. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chair of this afternoon's Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Palawa people and acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Joining me in Council Chambers for our Planning Authority meeting this afternoon is Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Russell Yaxley and Alderman Josh Cockshut. And we welcome Alderman Cockshut and Yaxley to the very first Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting, and thank you for joining the authority. The Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. I can confirm the Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Glenorchy City Council. I'll talk through our meeting procedures this afternoon before we get into our content. So the way our meeting works is that our planning officer will present their assessment and their recommendations and answer any questions of Alderman or Planning Authority members. I will then invite the applicant, if they are here, and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting, and speakers are limited to 5 minutes to address the authority. I may ask the planning officer then to comment on any matters raised by the applicant or the representatives. The planning authority will then discuss the application. And for statutory planning applications, the planning authority will decide the application and our senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. And for any planning scheme amendments, the strategic planner will explain the decisions being made by the planning authority and then the Tasmanian Planning Commission. When deciding an application, the planning authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, consider representations received during the public notification period and make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are pretty simple. Please comply with any directions given by myself as the chairperson, and please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. Agenda item 1 was the Planning Authority declaration, which we have just made. Agenda item 2 is apologies, leave of absence, and there are none this afternoon. Agenda item 3 is pecuniary interest. Do any Planning Authority members or staff present have any pecuniary interest this afternoon? None, thank you. Agenda item 4 is confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 7th of November 2022 be confirmed? Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Someone to second? Alderman King, any discussion of the minutes? No discussion?
No, thanks, Nick.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Item 5, proposed use and development, 7-lot subdivision and associated works, 3A Aquilia Street and 6 Merton Street, Glenorchy. And our planning officer to present to us this afternoon is Peter Koning. So over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I begin, the table to the agenda didn't include one sheet, so I'll just hand that out now, that one. It's very straightforward, as you may know. The planning scheme has acceptable solutions and performance criteria. This proposal complies with the acceptable solution, but the appendix just wasn't on there. It has been considered by the engineer and they've written to that, but for completeness, it's best to treat this much the same as all the other codes.
Sure.
I'll get into the meat of that as we go through, but I just thought I'd do that in the first instance.
Great, thank you.
Are you driving? Yes. Okay, next one then. So the proposal is for the subdivision of the site. The site's made up of a number of parcels and they each have different things to offer for the subdivision. It's a very obscure sized lot. It's sort of the leftovers from when Aquila Street was created in its various stages over the years. And what they're proposing to do is to create a number of ordinary sort of lots running along the southern parts of Merton and Aquila Street, hiving off a section which is not even contiguous to the lot on Aquila Street, which is shown as lot 7, and then the battle axe part in the centre is what may have traditionally been called an oversized lot, but we don't really work in those terms anymore. There is also a portion of Tolosa Street, which is a unit entitlement as part of 245. That's been included in the proposal because of infrastructure only. So it technically forms part of the subdivision, but there's no subdivision as such occurring with that land. It's just to service the development. Next one, please. So this table here shows the lots for the subdivision, and importantly, you would have noted in the report there's a discretionary consideration rather for sub-minimum frontages, and that's for lots 6 and 7. Otherwise, the lot shape, position and that sort of a thing, and the developable nature of the lots complies with the acceptable solution. If you go back one, please, Trevor. You'll see very faintly on the left-hand image, there's a sort of a 10 by 15 rectangle in each lot. And that's all you need under the TPSG in order to demonstrate that you can subdivide, that a person could purchase it and they could build a house in that 10 by 15 lot. So when we move to the next slide again, and this is something which has been covered in the reps, you'll see all of those unit dwelling outlines. That's not a part of what's being proposed. And I hope that was made fairly clear in my report, but I just want to make that very clear that we're not looking at multiple dwellings, we're looking at an oversized lot. So if we move to the next slide, this is a site. Having spoken with one of the representatives, it's sort of known as the paddock. It's got a moderate sort of fall, which has presented some challenges for stormwater, but they've been addressed through a lot of good work from our hydraulic engineer and the applicant. And Dan is on the line if there's any questions relating to stormwater and hydraulics. But otherwise, it's a vacant site, albeit of a fairly obscure arrangement, bordered by Merton and Aquila Street. Next, please. So what I've got highlighted here are the two frontages which are sub-minimum. One being the access handle for the large lot 6 and one for lot 7, which is the non-contiguous lot. I wouldn't call that an access handle, it's just a very narrow front part of the block, and they've shown a 10 by 15 area to the rear. So it will be used for access, but it's a bit wide to be considered an access strip in my opinion. Move on. Now, subdivision under the TPSG is a development which is not required to be categorised into a use class. So as you may know, a person might want to do a restaurant, so it's food services. Subdivision doesn't have a use class, and when we assess developments which don't have a use class, there's a certain test in the planning scheme, which is a sort of a blanket test for those sorts of things. Importantly, and that's why I've tabled that piece of paper, is we have to have regard to the purpose of the applicable zone and the purpose of any applicable code. So the flood-prone areas is an applicable code, even though it complies. When we get to it, we'll discuss how this responds to the purpose of that code. As I have assessed, the purpose of the general residential zone is to provide for a residential development. I think that this development does that by creating lots which are able to be built on for houses. And then as we move through the codes, where they've been assessed by relevant officers such as the EHO or our development engineer, they've been assessed as complying, and I think that that demonstrates inherently that they satisfy the purpose of those codes. There are no relevant local area objectives for that area, and there are no specific area plans. So in considering the purpose of those parts, I would consider that it complies. So I've picked this one out because it's not necessarily in the report. And again, you've got the table there, which demonstrates that it does comply. So the purpose of the Flood-Prone Areas Code is that people, property, infrastructure are not exposed to an unacceptable level of risk, options for adaptation and the like. It's a rather high level test, but when we move to the next slide, you'll see what we're looking at for why the code is applicable. And it's those blue bits to the right of the word, or to the right of 3A. I would consider that this is sort of modelling noise, and it's because of the way that the flood-prone areas map has been created, where it's simply a radar image of the land picking up depressions and saying these are subject to flooding. It's not connected to any overland flow paths or anything like that, and indeed the proposal complies because for 3A it's shown a 10 by 15 rectangle outside of those little spots, which I doubt amount to more than 10 to 15 metres squared. So in my mind, it meets the purpose of the Flood-Prone Areas Code in that there's not an unacceptable level of risk because a person can build outside of those little blue spots. We move to the next one. Or before we get into the guts of the representations, I suppose I'll just reiterate that the discretionary consideration relates to the frontage, to the Road and Railway Assets Code by virtue of a conjoined access, providing access for lots 3, 4 and 5, and for the attenuation code, which is owed to the distance to the Tolosa Quarry. So we referred that to our Environmental Health Officer and they've provided comment in the report and filled out the table suggesting that it complies with the performance criteria. So the proposal was advertised for the statutory 14-day period. We received 5 representations. I've got the issues, I suppose, listed here. Broadly, they relate to engineering type issues. A lot of people had concern about stormwater runoff, drainage, waterlogging, that sort of a thing. There was some concern, which is what I've tried to impart, about the dwelling density. I did speak to some people on the phone and sort of reiterated that we're not approving multiple dwellings, we're not approving landfill to facilitate any multiple dwellings, which is shown on those plans as indicative. That would be a subsequent approval, which I believe the owner is working toward. There was concern regarding heritage. However, there's no real statutory consideration for the heritage values of the site as linked to the house, which the land is adjacent to, which is on the local code. And there were a number of concerns raised by one representative relating to construction amenity, cars parking in front of their driveway and that sort of a thing, which in my mind is more of our jurisdiction as a road owner to ensure that people are properly using our roads, and it's not really for consideration in the subdivision of land. So I feel that I've sufficiently addressed all of their points in my report. And one lady is here now who wasn't able to put in a representation in time, but I did speak with her and she may wish to speak later, I'm not sure. Trevor, next one. So, as you will have seen, my recommendation is that an approval subject to be conditions is made. One of the conditions, which is not necessarily within the planning scheme, is relating to our abilities under the Local Government Building and Miscellaneous Provisions Act to require cash in lieu when a person is not proposing public open space. So our property section rather was referred to, and they came back and said, no, we don't want land. We've got Tolosa Street public facilities in the area. Taking cash in lieu can then be used for those facilities rather than taking land. So it's a relatively standard condition, but it does require some sort of nuance of consideration. I suppose that's all I have in presenting.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions of authority members for Peter at this stage?
Just a comment, Mayor, that, oh, sorry, Jen.
There you go.
I was just going to say it's one of the most in-depth explanations I've ever had in it, so well done, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
More questions, possibly through to the director. Just an understanding of the area. So obviously there's a lot of water flow potentially up there that people recognise, and it becomes an area just because of the area. So with the development of the area, is that likely to improve? You know, with the water being caught within the infrastructure that we put in place, is that likely to improve some of the water runoff in the area?
Thank you, Robert Dunsby.
Yes, through you, Chair. That is my understanding, because rather than sheeting across the land, it'll be put into the network. And our hydraulic engineer has looked at having on-site detention put inline, which is an oversized pipe, which then can sort of backfill, being released at a more modest flow rate into the system. So that's for 35 metres cubed of volume. So I expect it would work a lot better than water just sheeting across the land into people's fences. That, however, that'll be contingent on whatever gets built, which again, we're looking at providing connections as part of a subdivision, and then when a person wants to build something, they hook in. Now, if a person only wanted a small house, sheeting may be an issue, but that would be something we can deal with.
You mentioned that the developer's working with the council as well, so that would obviously be taken into consideration. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Right.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Dunsby. Any further questions?
Just one for you, Mayor, just regarding the quarry and its location area. There was mention about if there was some increased inactivity that happened from the quarry, I guess what additional approval did they need to have? So if they were going to upscale some of the quarrying, is there any, I guess, balances and checks for that to happen? If that makes sense.
Through you, Mayor. My understanding is that because it's a level 2 quarry, if they wanted to upscale, they would have to amend their EPN, which talks to volume and the methods of extracting materials. In doing that, the EPA would then say, okay, things are a lot different now from when your first EPN was issued. Maybe it's not appropriate, or I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But as a level 2, that's sort of managed by the EPA.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions.
No questions from Alderman Cockshott. I was going to ask a question about that issue as well. It talks about in the report on page 14 about the proposal satisfies the performance criteria given the current operational conditions, and also talks about a proposed garage. But is that because we're not talking about actual development here, are we? So is that
No, I'll just double check that one.
No. I thought it may have been a hangover from another report.
Which part of
So
page
that's
14 is it? Sorry.
Second last paragraph.
The proposal is. I suspect that's a typo.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
I thought that would be the case, but
I would replace with development,
the development.
rather, because subdivision is development.
Yeah, the development is for a non-habitable use. Yeah. Or no, it's for a subdivision rather than a.
Yes. Well, I would put a full stop after
Yeah.
EPN. Actually, I apologise.
Yeah, that's okay. But just to clarify, so where it says above, the proposal is separated from the mining lease area of the quarry by approximately 450 metres. That is correct.
I would defer to the EHO's comments on this one.
It's on page 14.
Page 14, yeah.
Oh yes, I know,
Yeah.
but with the assessment under the code, that was done by the EHO.
Yeah, sure.
So I'd have to find where they've
There
put in the distance. I didn't measure the distance myself because we sort of
Yeah,
get
of
the
course.
code to be assessed by the relevant officers.
Yeah. That distance is a key consideration in whether it meets the performance criteria or not.
Yes, it
Yeah.
would be.
Yes.
So that's as the crow flies, or is it?
It would be as the crow flies, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I guess I was just seeking assurance that that is actually correct.
Hmm.
That, you know, because that's what we're sort of considering here.
I'll just find the EHOs.
Looks more than 450 metres.
The EHO has measured it at 620 metres. So I would take it to be 620 metres.
So in that particular part of the report then, is there anything we need to consider? Like, I guess I just had concern that the right sort of reporting hasn't got into that section of the report.
Yes.
Just seeking assurance that actually it does meet that performance criteria based on the environmental health officer's assessment.
Yes, because I would take it that what the environmental health officer has said is more important than what's in the body of the report. So that reference to a garage and 450 metres had been put in, I suppose, as a copy and paste from when I inherited the report.
Through the chair, I've just had a look at the our spectrum mapping, and the distance is around 600 metres from the quarry to this development site. So that greater figure would be the correct figure.
Yes, which is better, I guess, than
Tip to tip.
451.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And on the, you mentioned, Peter, you mentioned the cash in lieu of open space contribution requirement. So I'm interested in a reminder on how that amount is determined. Do you know how that amount is determined?
The Act, the log bump as we call it, specifies the sort of percentage, which is 5% from memory, but it's got to be supported by a policy, and the council has a policy which I believe is to just do what the Act says.
5%.
And Mayor, it's based on the unimproved value of the land.
Right.
5% of that unimproved value of the land.
So if the block was worth $100,000, then it'd be $5,000 in essence. Yeah. Not taking unimproved, no roads, no nothing, just as it stands.
As it stands now, before development.
Yeah, before development, yes.
So it's the fact that the subdivision around it's already built, so that will be factored into it.
Yeah.
But unimproved value of the land itself, let's say without development.
Whatever it's valued at the present time, without any.
Thank you. I think they were my only questions. Yes, that was all my questions. So no other questions? No, we don't have the applicant here, but we do have a representative here. Ms. Ryan, would you like to address the authority? It's totally up to you. No?
We don't buy it.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a recommendation, a number of recommendations for us, in fact. Just let me a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 3A Aquila Street and 6 Merton Street, Glenorchy, subject to the following 21 conditions that are listed in our report there. Do I have someone to move that as a motion? Alderman Dunsby, thank you. Someone to second? Alderman Cockshott? Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. It'd be impressive to see this land become developed in an area that is, a lot of people have chosen to live there. It will open up some opportunities for people for some private housing potentially, and not social housing. We've had lots of focus as well. So to see an increase in the opportunities for housing in our area is wonderful. The way that these blocks of land, well, they all could have come together for this, you know, it's really good to see that people have worked together to make that happen. And I'm comfortable with all the other issues that have been raised and discussed, and rectifications are there should they need be. So happy to see this recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Alderman King.
Thank you, Chair. Like Alderman Dunsby, I feel the same with the progress here, but there are 21 conditions, which means this is just not a walk in the park. So this is the embryonic stage of this progress, and so there's a lot more work to be done, and our staff are making sure that everyone's protected and that this process is properly in place, so that whatever happens in a proper and correct way. So thank you for the work that you've done and yet to do.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any other discussion?
No.
I too am happy to support the recommendations, and I echo Alderman King's comments earlier about the quality of the presentation. Thank you, Peter. It was fabulous. And I think you've addressed some of the issues that were raised, or all of the issues that have been raised by the representatives, and it's important that we note we have received and noted those issues raised by the representatives, and on considering the information provided by officers in response, I feel satisfied that the performance criteria are met. I think it's also really important to note that this development before us is, or the application that we're considering is for subdivision rather than actually the development of housing. So it is early on in the process, and there will be further stages where somebody does want to, if should the subdivision be approved this afternoon, go forward to development. So there will be further opportunities for representatives to have their voice heard as development goes forward on those parcels of land. So really important to note, particularly some of the issues raised by representatives don't necessarily apply so much to a subdivision as they would to a development application for actual development of property on housing on the land. So there are further opportunities for representatives down the track. Satisfied that we've heard there were three discretions, and satisfied that the report that we've been presented with addresses demonstrates that those performance criteria in relation to those discretions are met, and happy to support the development permit going forward. So back to you, Alderman Dunsby, to close debate. I'll put the recommendation or the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Peter, would you like to explain, or Trevor, like to explain the process from here?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. The process from here forward is that with the GPA having made a decision on this application and made a decision to approve the application, a planning permit will be prepared and that will be sent to the applicant. The applicant will have a period of time to appeal, and also the representatives have a period of time to appeal, 14 days. If there's no appeal lodged within 14 days, then that planning permit will take effect and they'll be able to act on that permit.
Thank you, Trevor. That brings our meeting to a close for Monday, 5th of December at 4:32 p.m. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us here in Chambers. Thank you to those who have joined us online. We shall see you again at 6 p.m. if you are so inclined to join us back here in Chambers or online for our annual general meeting.